I missed my wife's last call. Her voicemail still rings every morning. The phone rang at 7:13 that morning, same as it had every morning for 362 days. I was standing at the kitchen counter with my hand already reaching for it before the sound fully registered. The caller ID showed her number. Margaret's number. I let it ring 4 times before I picked up, knowing what would come next. Her voice filled the small kitchen, steady and certain, telling me she loved me and that I should eat something real for breakfast. The message ended. I set the phone down and stared at the scrambled eggs congealing on the plate in front of me. The notification said I had one saved message. I always saved it, every single morning. But that morning, something in her inflection caught differently. A hesitation before she said my name. A breath held too long before the word, breakfast. I played it again. Then again. By the 4th listen, my coffee had gone cold, and I understood I had been hearing it wrong for almost a year. I am 71 years old. I spent 43 years married to Margaret Ann Holloway, a woman who kept lists in spiral notebooks and always folded the dish towels in thirds. I taught history at the community college until my knees gave out and the department shifted to online modules I could not navigate. Margaret worked as a registrar at the same school until the year she got sick. We lived in a brick ranch house with a blue front door that she painted herself when we first moved in. The door needs painting again now. I look at it some mornings and think about buying a brush and a can of the same color, but I never do. The morning she died, I was at the hardware store. She had asked me to pick up weather stripping for the back door. It was November and she was cold all the time by then. The hospice nurse had come at 9 and stayed until 11. Margaret told me to go, that she wanted me out of the house for an hour so she could nap without me hovering. I kissed her forehead and left. The call came at 11:47. I was standing in aisle 6 holding a roll of foam tape when my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen and saw her name. I was about to answer when someone asked me a question about drywall anchors, and I turned to respond. By the time I looked back, the call had gone to voicemail. I drove home doing 60 in a 45 zone. The nurse met me at the door and told me Margaret had passed quietly 8 minutes earlier. She had tried calling me herself, but my line was busy. Margaret must have dialed as she felt herself going, the nurse said. It happened that way sometimes. A last effort to hear a familiar voice. I did not listen to the voicemail that day, or the next, or for 2 weeks after the funeral. When I finally did, I was sitting in the dark living room at 3 in the morning because sleep had stopped making sense. Her voice was soft and slower than usual, but clear. She said my name. She said she loved me. She told me to eat breakfast, to take care of myself, to remember the good days. She said she was not afraid. Then the message ended. I saved it. I set an alarm for 7:13 every morning and called my own phone from hers, which I kept charged on her nightstand. The voicemail played automatically. It became a routine. I would listen, save the message again, and then start my day. Some mornings I cried. Most mornings I just stood there and let her voice fill the silence. People told me it was not healthy. Margaret's sister came by in February and saw the phone on the charger. She said I needed to let go, that keeping her number active was just hurting myself. I thanked her for the casserole she brought and walked her to the door. I did not explain. There was nothing to explain. The voicemail was all I had left of her voice, and I was not ready to lose it. But that morning, 362 days after she died, I heard something I had missed. It was in the way she said breakfast. A slight emphasis on the first syllable. Break fast. Like 2 words instead of 1. I rewound and played it again. The same thing. Then I caught the pause after she said to remember the good days. Not just a natural breath, a deliberate space, like she wanted me to pay attention to what came next. I sat down at the kitchen table and played the message on speaker. I closed my eyes and listened not to the meaning of the words, but to the rhythm. She said my name, Walter. Then a pause. She said, I love you. Another pause. Eat breakfast. Longer pause. Take care of yourself. Pause. Remember the good days. A breath. I am not afraid. I pulled out a notepad and wrote each phrase on its own line. 7 phrases. 7 pauses. I stared at the list and felt something shift in my chest. Something that was not grief but recognition. Margaret had always been deliberate. She did not waste words. Every sentence she spoke had a shape and a reason. I picked up her phone and opened the photos. She had been meticulous about organizing them into albums. I scrolled back to the week before she died. There were pictures of the backyard in late autumn light, a close-up of the oak tree we had planted when we first bought the house, a photo of the kitchen window taken from outside, another of the blue front door. I stopped. The photo of the front door was dated 3 days before she passed. I zoomed in. There was something on the door frame, a small mark near the top hinge. I could not make it out clearly in the photo, but it looked deliberate. Not damage. A mark. I stood and walked to the front door. The morning sun was just starting to reach the porch. I opened the door and examined the frame. There, just above the top hinge, was a small pencil line. Horizontal. About 2 inches long. I would have missed it if I had not been looking. I ran my finger over it and felt an indent beneath the paint. Something had been taped there once. I went back to the kitchen and played the voicemail again. Eat breakfast. I opened the cabinet above the coffee maker. Margaret had kept the cereal boxes lined up by height, labels facing forward. I pulled each one out and checked behind them. Nothing. I moved to the next cabinet. Canned goods, spices, her collection of mismatched mugs. I was about to close the door when I noticed one mug sitting slightly forward from the rest. It was white with a chipped handle, a generic thing we had gotten free at some bank promotion years ago. I pulled it down and looked inside. There was a folded piece of paper. I set the mug on the counter and unfolded the paper carefully. It was a page torn from one of her spiral notebooks. Her handwriting covered the front in neat blue ink. At the top she had written, "For Walter, when you are ready to look." My hands were shaking. I sat down and read. The letter was dated 2 weeks before she died. She started by saying she loved me and that she knew I would find this eventually because I always listened when she needed me to. She said she had been thinking about what came after, not for her, but for me. She knew I would struggle. She knew I would hold on to her voice and replay it until the words lost meaning. She said that was fine for a time, but that she needed me to understand something. She wrote that the voicemail was not just a goodbye. It was a map. She had left 7 things for me to find, 1 for each phrase she spoke. Each one would lead to the next. She said I had to follow them in order, that it would not make sense otherwise. The first was the letter I was holding. The second would be in the place where we broke bread together every Sunday. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it and put it in my shirt pocket. The place where we broke bread together every Sunday. I knew immediately. St. Anthony's, 4 blocks north on Maple Street. We had attended services there for 30 years. Margaret sang in the choir until her lungs weakened. I still went most weeks, sitting in the same pew, 5th row on the left. I looked at the clock. It was 8:30. Sunday services started at 10. I had time. I showered and dressed in my gray slacks, and the blue button-down she always said brought out my eyes. I put the letter in my jacket pocket and walked the 4 blocks in cool morning air that smelled like cut grass and distant rain. The church was already open. Father Dominic was arranging hymnals in the vestibule. He greeted me by name and asked how I was holding up. I told him I was managing. He nodded and touched my shoulder in that brief way people do when they want to offer comfort, but do not know how. I thanked him and walked into the sanctuary. Our pew was empty. I sat in my usual spot on the aisle and looked around. Margaret had known this space as well as our own living room. She knew which floorboards creaked, which kneelers stuck, which stained glass window caught the morning light best. If she had left something here, it would be somewhere only I would think to look. I stood and walked to the choir loft. Margaret's seat had been 3rd from the left in the 2nd row. I climbed the narrow stairs and stood behind the chairs. The music stands were empty, except for a stack of old programs. I checked under her chair. Nothing. I ran my hand along the underside of the seat. My fingers found tape. I peeled it off carefully. A small key fell into my palm. It was brass and old-fashioned, the kind that opened a padlock or a diary. I turned it over. On one side, stamped into the metal, were the numbers 3 and 7. I pocketed the key and returned to the pew. Father Dominic had started greeting early arrivals. I slipped out through the side door and walked home. My mind was running through possibilities. 3 and 7. Margaret's birthday was March 7th. Our anniversary was October 3rd. The house number was 212. None of it fit. I stood in the kitchen and played the voicemail again. The third phrase was, "Take care of yourself." I thought about where Margaret would have told me to take care of myself. The bathroom. The medicine cabinet. I went upstairs and opened the mirrored door above the sink. Inside were my prescriptions, a bottle of aspirin, a tube of ointment for my knees. I moved each item. Behind the aspirin was a small metal box I had never seen before. I pulled it out. It was the size of a deck of cards, green with flecks of rust on the corners. There was a small padlock holding it shut. I tried the key. It turned smoothly. Inside the box was a photograph and another folded note. The photograph showed Margaret and me standing in front of a cabin. Mountains rose behind us. We were younger, maybe in our early 50s. Margaret was smiling in that full, unguarded way she only did when we were away from home. I remembered the trip. We had rented the cabin for a week in late summer. No phone service, no television. Just us and the woods and a lake that turned silver at dusk. The note was shorter, this one. She wrote, "You told me that week that if you could stop time anywhere, it would be there. I never forgot that. Remember the good days, Walter. They are not gone. They are just waiting for you to find them again." The fourth phrase was, "Remember the good days." I reread the note, the photograph, the cabin. I had not thought about that place in years. We had only gone once. Money was tight and the drive was long, and after Margaret got sick, traveling became impossible. But I remembered everything about it. The smell of pine sap, the sound of the screen door slapping shut, the way the light came through the trees in the morning. I went to the closet in the spare bedroom where we kept old files and boxes of paperwork. Margaret had been the organizer. Everything was labeled and dated. I found the box marked Travel and pulled it down. Inside were brochures, ticket stubs, postcards from trips we had taken. I sorted through them until I found a folder labeled Summer Cabin. Inside was the rental agreement, a map, and a business card for the property owner. His name was printed across the top, Daniel Kearney. I looked at the date on the rental agreement. 23 years ago. I wondered if the man was even still alive, if the cabin still existed. But Margaret had left this for me to find. That meant something. I went downstairs and found my laptop. It took me 3 tries to remember my email password. I typed the name, Daniel Kearney, and the county where the cabin had been. The search brought up a website for a vacation rental service. I clicked through and found a listing for a cabin that looked familiar. Same porch, same view. The description said it had been family-owned for 40 years. There was a phone number. I called. A woman answered. I asked if Daniel Kearney still owned the property. She said he did, that he was her father, and that he still managed the bookings himself even though he was 86. I asked if I could speak with him. She hesitated, then said she would have him call me back. He called 20 minutes later. His voice was rough but steady. I told him my name and said my wife and I had stayed at his cabin in the summer 2 decades ago. I told him she had passed and that I was trying to retrace something she had left for me. I asked if he remembered us. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Margaret, the woman who sang while she cooked." I felt my throat tighten. Yes, that was her. He said she had called him 6 months before she died. She had asked if he still owned the cabin. She wanted to know if she could leave something there for me to find later. He said yes without hesitation. She sent him a package with instructions. He did what she asked. I asked what she had left. He said it was inside the cabin in a place she specified. He would tell me when I arrived. I asked when I could come. He said any time. The cabin was empty next week. I booked 3 nights starting the following Monday. I had not left town in over a year. I had not driven more than 20 miles in months, but I filled the car with gas and packed a small bag, and on Monday morning I followed the directions Margaret had traced on a map 23 years earlier. The drive took 6 hours. The roads narrowed and climbed. Trees pressed close. The radio lost signal, and I drove in silence. I thought about the voicemail. 5 phrases left. I was halfway through her map. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, but exactly the same. The porch sagged slightly on the left side. The windows still had the white curtains. I parked and sat in the car for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. Then I got out and knocked on the door. Daniel Kearney answered. He was thin and stooped, with hands that shook slightly when he reached out to shake mine. He said he had been waiting. He led me inside and pointed to the fireplace. On the mantel was a small wooden box with a brass latch. He said Margaret had sent it along with a letter asking him to keep it safe until I came looking. He handed me the box and then excused himself, saying he lived just down the road and to call if I needed anything. I thanked him. He paused at the door and said Margaret had written in her letter that I was a good man who sometimes needed a push to see what was right in front of him. Then he left. I sat on the couch and opened the box. Inside was a stack of letters bound with a ribbon. All of them were addressed to me in Margaret's handwriting. The top one had a date from 6 months before she died. I untied the ribbon and began to read. The letters were not long. Each one was a page, maybe 2. She had written one every week for 6 months. She wrote about ordinary things, the way the light hit the kitchen in the afternoon, the sound of rain on the roof, a conversation we had over breakfast that made her laugh. She wrote about moments I had forgotten or never noticed, small kindnesses I had done without thinking, times I had been patient when she was afraid or angry or too tired to be reasonable. She also wrote about things she regretted, arguments we never resolved, trips we never took, time she wasted being stubborn when she should have been grateful. She said she was writing it all down because she wanted me to know that she saw our life clearly, the good and the bad, and that she would not trade a single day. The last letter was different. It was longer and written in a shakier hand. She said she knew, by the time I read this, I would have been listening to her voicemail for months. She said she had recorded it carefully, pacing each phrase so I would notice eventually. She wanted me to go looking, not for her, but for the life we had built. She said the voicemail was not meant to keep me stuck. It was meant to show me the way forward. She wrote, "I am not afraid, Walter. I never was. And I do not want you to be afraid either. You have more life ahead of you than behind you if you choose to see it. The things I left for you are reminders, not of me, but of who you are. A man who listens, a man who shows up, a man who does not quit." I set the letter down and looked around the cabin. The same furniture, the same smell of wood smoke and dust. I stood and walked to the window. The lake was still there, silver in the late afternoon light. I could hear Margaret's voice in my head, not from the voicemail, but from memory. Real memory. The way she laughed. The way she hummed when she cooked. The way she said my name when she was trying to get my attention. I spent 3 days at the cabin. I reread the letters. I walked the trails we had walked. I sat on the porch in the mornings with coffee and watched the light change. On the last day, I called Daniel Kearney and thanked him. He said Margaret had told him I would need time alone and that he should not bother me unless I asked. I told him she knew me well. I drove home on Thursday. The house felt different when I walked in. Not empty, just quiet. I went to the kitchen and looked at her phone on the nightstand. I picked it up and listened to the voicemail one more time. Her voice was the same. The words were the same. But I heard them differently now. She had said, "I am not afraid," not as a comfort to herself, as a permission for me. I saved the message. Then I opened the settings and turned off the alarm. I would not delete the voicemail, but I would not let it run my mornings anymore either. I still had 2 phrases left. Take care of yourself. I am not afraid. I thought about what she might have left for those, but I realized I did not need to find them right away. She had given me the most important thing already, the reminder that I was still here, that I still had choices, that the life we built together did not end when she died. I picked up the notepad where I had written the 7 phrases. I looked at the list and understood that she had not just been leaving me clues. She had been teaching me how to listen again, how to see, how to live without her but not without everything we had been. The blue front door still needs painting. I bought the brush and the paint last week. I have not opened the can yet, but I will. Maybe this weekend. Maybe next. Margaret would tell me not to rush. She would say there is time. And for the first time in a long time, I believe her. The phone does not ring at 7:13 anymore. But some mornings I still pick it up and play the voicemail. Not because I need to hear her voice to get through the day, but because I want to. Because it reminds me that love does not vanish when someone dies. It just changes shape. It becomes the letters in a wooden box. The key taped under a chair. The map drawn in, pauses and careful words. Margaret knew I would get stuck. She knew I would hold on too tight. So she built me a way out. Not away from her, but toward the rest of my life. 7 phrases, 7 gifts, 7 chances to remember that grief is not the end of the story. I am 71 years old. I spent 43 years married to a woman who loved me enough to let me go. And every morning now, I wake up and try to be the man she saw when she looked at me. Not perfect, not fearless, just willing to keep going. The voicemail is still saved. I will keep it as long as the phone works. But I do not need it the way I did. I have her letters. I have the memory of the cabin. I have the life we built in this house with the blue door. And I have the knowledge that she trusted me to find my way, even when I could not see the path. Some nights I sit in the living room and think about the last 2 phrases. Take care of yourself. I am not afraid. I think maybe those are not things she left hidden somewhere. Maybe those are things I have to give myself. The permission to eat a real breakfast, to paint the door, to call her sister back, to go to church without crying, to live without apology. Margaret was not afraid, and because of that, I do not have to be either. The phone sits on her nightstand. The charge light blinks green. I walk past it every morning on my way downstairs. Sometimes I stop and pick it up. Sometimes I do not. Either way is fine. She would tell me that. She would say the choice is mine. And she would mean it. I think about the morning I missed her call. I think about standing in the hardware store with the phone buzzing in my pocket. For months I believed that missing that call was the worst thing I had ever done. That if I had answered, I could have said goodbye properly. I could have told her one more time that I loved her. But now I understand that she did not need me to answer. She needed me to listen later, to really listen, to hear not just her voice, but the message underneath it. She had been preparing me, giving me instructions, building a ladder out of grief 1 phrase at a time. And I had been so busy mourning that I almost missed it entirely. I found the first 5 pieces of her map, the letter in the mug, the key in the church, the photograph in the metal box, the cabin and the letters. Each one led me further from the edge of despair and closer to something I had forgotten. The knowledge that I was still alive, that I still mattered, that my life was not over just because hers was. I do not know what the last 2 pieces are. I do not know if they are physical things I will find or realizations I will come to on my own. But I am not worried. Margaret taught me patience. She taught me to trust the process. She taught me that love is not something you lose. It is something you carry. The kitchen clock reads 7:15. I pour a cup of coffee and sit at the table. The morning light comes through the window in slanted gold bars. I can hear birds outside, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing on the street, all the small noises of a house that is still lived in, still cared for, still a home. I think about calling her sister, about inviting her over for lunch. She has been patient with me, kind. I should let her know I am doing better, that I am finding my way. Margaret would want that. I finish my coffee and wash the cup. I dry it and put it back in the cabinet, labels facing forward the way Margaret always did. The routine feels good, solid, like something I can hold on to without being held back. Before I leave the kitchen, I glance at her phone one more time. The screen is dark. I do not pick it up. Not today. Today I will remember her in other ways. In the order of the cabinets, in the blue door that needs painting, in the decision to eat breakfast and take care of myself and not be afraid. Those were her last two phrases. Maybe they were never hidden at all. Maybe they were the lesson I had to learn by finding everything else first. That taking care of myself is not a betrayal of her memory. That being unafraid is not the same as forgetting. That I can honor her by living. Well, not by living in the past. I walk to the front door and open it. The morning air is cool and clean. The blue paint is faded and peeling, but it is still her color. Still the door she chose. I will paint it. Soon, when I am ready, and when I do, I will think about her standing on this porch with a brush in her hand, making this house ours. Margaret Ann Holloway, my wife, my partner, the woman who knew me well enough to leave me a map when I needed it most. I carry her with me, not in a voicemail that plays every morning, but in the choices I make, in the care I take, in the willingness to keep moving forward, even when it hurts. The phone does not ring, but I can still hear her voice, not recorded, not preserved in digital memory, just there, in my mind, in my heart, telling me the same thing she always told me, that I am loved, that I am capable, that I am enough. And for the first time in 362 days, I believe her.